Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the DMA. I'm Nicole Myers, Chief Curatorial and Research Officer, and the Barbara Thomas Lemon Senior Curator of European Art. I'm thrilled to see you all for this year's annual Richard R. Bretell Lecture. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize Carol and Roger Horchow for having established an endowment to support this important lecture series. The Horchows dedicated this annual program to their dear friend, Rick Bretell, in a celebration of European art from the 19th and 20th centuries. We're joined here today by his wife, Carol, and her friends as well, so I'm pleased to extend an extra special welcome and thank you for being here this afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to welcome back to our stage our esteemed speaker, Dr. Justine de Jong, Associate Professor of the History of Art at the Fashion Institute of Technology at SUNY. Justine specializes in the intersection of art and fashion, and her research and writing interests include 19th and 20th century art, literature, visual and material culture, as well as modernism and fashion. Justine is the editor of Fashion and European Art, Dress and Identity, Politics in the Body, 1775 to 1925, and of the Fashion History Timeline website, which is an incredible resource. If you've not yet gone, please do. You will go down rabbit holes of the most fascinating essays and entries. Again, this intersection of fashion and art. Some of you may recall the Bretell lecture that Justine delivered in 2019 on the Impressionist painter Berthe Morisot and her depiction of the fashionable Parisian woman. Justine is the first speaker in my 10 years here at the DMA that I've invited to come back. She's such an incredible scholar and engaging lecturer. And with her recent publication on her latest book, The Art of Parisian Chic, Modern Women and Modern Artists in Impressionist Paris, that just came out in 2025, I really just couldn't wait to invite her back here to the DMA. She specializes in decoding the details of dress, behavior, and styling that defined late 19th century Parisian women and the invention by artists of the chic Parisienne in art and in life. The DMA store has a limited set of Justine's books, and she'll be happy to sign your copy if you'd like to, either you brought your own or you'd like to purchase one of those after the lecture. She'll be here waiting and very happy to chat with you and to sign your book again at the end of her talk. So with that, please join me in welcoming back Justine to the DMA's podium.
Thank you, Nikki, for that very kind introduction. I hope to live up to it. And to the whole team at the DMA for making me feel so welcome. I'm very excited to be with you today, and thank you all for coming. Edouard Manet was celebrated for his paintings of chic Parisiennes like Isabelle Lemonnier, one of his favorite models, whom you see here. The elegant and charming Lemonnier, the sister of famous salon hostess Marguerite Charpentier, fascinated Manet. Both were masters of the art of Parisian chic, aligning dress, appearance, and behavior in line with the expectations of the time, as we'll learn about today. At the same time, they seem to have taken pleasure in defying those rules, as we will see. Edouard Manet was born into a well-to-do family. His father was a judge. After a failed attempt at a naval career, Manet was allowed to study painting, and he won admission to the Paris Salon first in 1861, when he was 29. The Paris Salon was the huge state-sponsored art exhibition that was the entertainment of the summer in Paris every year. It featured thousands of paintings hung frame to frame. As many as 100,000 people would visit the exhibition on Sundays when it was free. Isabelle Lemonnier was similarly born into an upper-middle-class family. She was the daughter of a successful Parisian jeweler, and in her early 20s, when she met the by then well-established Manet, who was in his late 40s and married. Isabelle's older sister, Marguerite, was a brilliant society hostess and had married one of the leading publishers of the day, Georges Charpentier. Charpentier would champion naturalist writers, including Émile Zola, Gustave Flaubert, and Guy de Maupassant. He also promoted Impressionist painters like Manet and Renoir, who painted his wife and children, organizing exhibitions of their work in the offices of his illustrated magazine, La Vie Moderne. Manet undoubtedly met Isabelle in one of her sister's famous Friday salons, which drew writers, artists, actors, musicians, and politicians to the Charpentier home. Isabelle was a fashionable young woman and one of Manet's favorite models during his final years. She posed for 6 oil paintings and many pastel and watercolor studies. She mostly posed in day dresses and jackets in dark colors, but also twice in evening dress. The pale blue ball gown Isabelle wears is closely aligned with the fashions of the day, as this fashion plate attests. Also, like the models in the plate, Isabelle wears no jewelry, which was considered appropriate as she was unmarried, even though her father was one of the leading jewelers. The portrait now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art is the only one with any suggestion of a background. It shows Isabelle seated in a blue armchair and a black fur-edged dinner dress with a small corsage of flowers at her bust. She could be at one of her sister's Friday night salons. The rest of the portraits are set in a vague, undefined space, which was typical of Manet's late works, but also lent the paintings a sense of universality. She could be any anonymous Parisienne encountered on the streets of Paris. Indeed, it is sometimes hard to recognize that they were all posed by the same woman, except for the large central swoop of hair she favored on her forehead. If you look for it, then you can't not see it. In addition to the oils and the pastel we were looking at, Manet also enjoyed sketching Isabelle. He would often ornament her letters to her with watercolor studies of her head and face. He seems to have particularly liked one of her red bonnets that you see here. In the summer of 1880, he sent her a series of letters decorated with charming watercolor sketches of flowers. This is only a small selection. These letters to Isabelle are not unique in Manet's oeuvre. He illustrated many of his letters to his friends that summer with similar sketches. He was writing to her from Bellevue in the suburbs of Paris, where he had rented a house for the summer in an effort to improve his health. Other letters he topped with watercolor sketches of plums and peaches. In a more unusual gesture, Manet even tried his hand at poetry, writing a modest poem playing on Isabelle's name, with each line ending in belle. À Isabelle, cette Marie belle, et la plus belle, c'est Isabelle. It's a better poem in French than English. Actually, this morning I was really excited to see the hotel at breakfast had Mirabelle plum preserves for the toast, so it seems fated. Sometimes the letters featured Manet's cat, or even a swallow. But occasionally they were a bit more surprising, like this letter ornamented with watercolor sketches of women's legs and feet, all attractively shod in high-heeled boots and shoes. He even sent Isabelle one of his sketches of her diving into the ocean with an emphasis on her rounded derriere. He liked it so much he painted it more than once. These sketches come off as irreverent, flirtatious, and a bit risque. Isabella was likely flattered by all the attention from the charming Manet, though one wonders what she thought of this one. In the Dallas portrait, Isabelle wears a brown coat trimmed with fur, and her hands are tucked inside a fur muff. The details of her costume are thinly painted, and Manet's attention is concentrated on her lively face. She wears a similar brown coat in a portrait in the Hermitage collection in St. Petersburg. These photographs of the Countess Dudley from around the same time give you a sense of what the coat and bonnet might have looked like in real life. This sort of dark, fur-edged jacket was very fashionable at the end of the 1870s and in the early 1880s. You can see many variations of the type in this 1879 fashion plate. Like the plum-colored coat in this 1881 plate, Isabelle's jacket seems to feature the fur running down the coat's right-hand side with only a short piece on the left, so placed to encircle the neck when fastened. Manet's dynamic brushwork in the lower body makes it appear that Isabelle is moving to the left, casually throwing us a glance over her shoulder as she departs, as the women in these fashion plates do. Indeed, all the plates show women on the streets of Paris. Contemporary guidebooks warned foreign visitors about the number and variety of women they would encounter on Parisian boulevards compared to other European capitals. Women of all classes and types could be seen everywhere in the modern city. Manet loved women's fashion. He carefully studied fashion plates like the one on the right. Antonin Proust records Manet having spent, quote, a day in ecstasy in front of the fabrics of Madame Decaux, who was one of the leading couturiers of the day. later also visiting Madame 𝖬𝗿, the celebrated milliner, to compose a fashionable toilette for Jean, the painting on the left, now in the Getty collection, which we'll talk more about later. The dapper Manet was the friend of many fashionable women, both respectable ones like Isabelle Lemonnier and less respectable ones like Marie Laurent, an actress and hostess of a leading literary salon. In autumn, Laurent wears a luxe brown fur cloak created for her by the leading fashion designer of the day, Charles Frederick Worth. Laurent was the mistress of Dr. Thomas Evans, the American dentist to the Emperor Napoleon III. Manet wrote to the poet Stéphane Mallarmé, enraptured by Laurent's brown fur jacket, called a pelisse in French. Quote, "She's had a pelisse made. What a pelisse, my dear friend. I was mesmerized. I left Mary Laurent saying to her, 'When you've worn that pelisse out, give it to me.' She promised she would." So why was Manet and the other Impressionists so interested in women's fashion? To answer that, you have to start with Napoleon III, the nephew of the first, more famous Napoleon. He had seized power in a coup in 1851 and had established France's Second Empire. His wife, the Empress Eugénie, became an important fashion leader and client of the young designer Worth, whose designs would take Paris by storm. She even modeled for the fashion plate you see on the left to promote French tailors who produced riding habits. She sought to dethrone London as the best source for riding habits and make Paris the leader of all women's fashion. Riding surged in popularity in Paris thanks in part to her example. You could even rent horses for an afternoon ride if you couldn't afford one yourself. Emperor Napoleon III built a flashy new opera house, which you can still visit today, as part of his transformation of Paris. Note the fashionable black-clad Parisienne that Barraud includes crossing the street in front of the Palais Garnier. Napoleon III knocked down countless buildings to build the long, straight, broad new boulevards that Manet shows us in the center image, and added streetlights, benches, urinals, and also advertising columns. Building codes mandated that any new buildings share the same general aesthetic, creating the beautiful harmony that's so well known and so loved today. Thousands of similar six-story buildings with elegant iron balconies were built across the city. Napoleon III transformed the royal parks into public parks. Life was lived in public as never before. All of Paris became a show. Indeed, Napoleon III's Second Empire witnessed the democratization of fashion. Dressing in fashionable silhouettes became possible for the first time across classes. Even working class women could afford a cheap steel crinoline cage or bustle. With mechanical looms, fabric prices plunged. Shopping became an acceptable bourgeois pastime. The 19th century witnessed the rise of the middle class thanks to the Industrial Revolution. Mechanized mass production made everything cheaper than it had been before. Incomes rose. Guild restrictions that had limited shops to selling one type of good had been abolished by the French Revolution, paving the way for the rise of the grand department store that sold everything you might need under one glamorous roof. Department stores like Printemps and Bon Marché would each have up to 70,000 customers a day. The news illustration at right shows the crush of people that would crowd the stores, especially on sales days. In 1881, Printemps had burned down, and so the owner took the opportunity to build it back even bigger, as you can see in Barraud's painting with all the scaffolding on the right. Department stores were places of wonder, affordable luxury sold to the elite and the masses. As Barraud's painting suggests, there were more people on the streets than ever before. Paris's population had surged to nearly 2 million people versus only 500,000 at the beginning of the century. Paris felt new and strange. There were fashionably dressed people everywhere. You could no longer know who for certain someone was just by looking at them. An 1879 caricature featuring a woman in a dark coat, edged in fur and holding a muff, much like Isabelle Lemonnier, plays on that anxiety. Titled "In the Street," the caption has the woman exclaiming, "Sir, go on your way. I am an honest woman." To which the man rudely replies, "Bah, and since when?" Honest in this case does not mean truthful, but instead respectable. In English, we have the expression, make an honest woman of her, when urging a man to marry his girlfriend. So in the caricature, the man is disappointed to discover the woman he's accosting in the street is uninterested or unavailable to be his mistress. The choices women made about what they wore and how they wore it, as well as who they had paint and photograph them, were always being scrutinized, as the Countess Dash reveals. Quote, by the mere inspection of a woman's exterior appearance, another woman, if she has intelligence and the habit, will know what class she belongs to, what was her education, what society she has seen. She will even discern her tastes, her character, if she takes the trouble to observe. Often her manner of arranging her shawl, of putting on her hat, of fastening her gloves, reveals an entire existence. They were very confident they were right. The chic Parisienne became central to the image of modern Paris and became an ideal for women of all classes beginning in the 1860s. The Parisienne is the iconic Parisian woman known worldwide for her innate elegance and her exquisite taste. She was confident, sophisticated, impeccably dressed, not just chasing the latest styles, and a bit flirty. She reflected the body ideals of the time, which favored a slender waist and a generous bust. The Parisienne came to embody notions of good taste and of chic. When everyone can dress fashionably and fashion is constantly changing, you need good taste to know how to flatter yourself and not become a fashion victim. When Carlos Durand exhibited this portrait of his wife, Pauline Croisette, at the 1869 Salon, she was celebrated as the perfect Parisienne. She wears a fashionable but not showy black dress. She clearly knows what flatters her. Black had become a fashionable color choice for the chic Parisienne as it appeared elegant and restrained when the streets were filled with women in bright colors made possible by the recent invention of artificial dyes. In the 1860s, bright colors were fashionable, but they weren't chic or tasteful. Croisette has a small red rose at her breast, but a yellow tea rose in her bonnet, a confident choice, not too matchy-matchy, made by a chic Parisienne. She stares out at us serenely, almost as an invitation, as she pulls on the pinky of her left glove. We notice she's dropped the right glove on the ground, which invites us to gallantly pick it up. Critics and the public were charmed. The Parisienne was celebrated as the fashionable ideal and communicated to the world via the press, particularly the French fashion press, which exploded in this period. Not only the number of fashion magazines, but their circulation numbers increased dramatically. As Paris came to dominate women's fashion, its preeminent fashion journals circulated worldwide to hundreds of thousands of readers, and international sales by its couturiers soared. Their distribution spanned 6 continents. The leading Moniteur de la Mode published 8 foreign editions, and its competitor, Le Mode Illustré, accepted subscribers from more than 50 countries and territories from as far away as China, Australia, and the Marquesas. Even working-class dressmakers could dress like proper bourgeois women. Here we have 2 dressmakers dressed exactly like the bourgeois women they made clothing for. Fashion magazines even included paper dress patterns like the one you see on the right, even some by the couturier Charles Frederick Worth, that women could copy at home or bring to their own dressmaker, making the latest styles widely available. At the same time, photographic carte de visites democratized portraiture and were a tremendous success with the public. Painted portraits, which cost hundreds or even thousands of francs, were too expensive for most women, but a dozen carte de visite photographs, which economized by including as many as 8 small images per plate, only cost 15 francs in 1862. Photographs of celebrities were avidly collected and traded. Having yourself photographed in the latest fashions became an essential part of the lives of 19th century women of all classes. Photography allowed women to recast themselves in new roles and new costumes. One comic newspaper at the time recounted the story of a maid who secretly borrowed an outfit from her mistress to have her photograph taken and was discovered. "How, Marie, do you, my servant, have my dress, my hat, my lace?" To which Marie nonchalantly replied, "Oh, come on, madame," very innocently. "It was to have a photograph taken of me to send to my family in the country." Her family and friends back home will have no idea that the dress, hat, and lace that she wears are not her own. Identifying who people were by how they dressed and acted became a popular entertainment in Paris in art and life. Identifying types relied on stereotypical expectations about how certain types of people dressed and acted. Genre paintings like this one that featured clearly legible types of people surged in popularity. It became a game to spot the types included. This painting by Charles Giron, titled The Two Sisters, is nearly 21 feet wide and more than 14 feet tall, almost as large as the stage. The screen. This is a very large screen. Critics identified more than 20 different types in the painting, but I'll only point out 6. Read the book if you want to learn about more. First, note the chic Parisienne buying flowers in the right-hand corner. But let's zoom in on the central drama that the title references. We see a courtesan riding in a carriage. We can tell from the luxury of her open carriage and her showy dress. She's wearing light colors, when dark colors like those worn by the Parisienne were typically worn out and about in the city. She's out to attract attention, and noticeably alone, except for her tiny white dog. Her hatless working-class sister is simply dressed in a blue striped dress with a black apron, walking with 2 children at her side. Her husband is also there, incongruously holding a pickaxe and a baby. She calls out to her sister in the carriage with an accusatory gesture. We're to imagine that she's rebuking her sister for her life of vice. In the background, you can see a shapely equestrienne called an Amazon in French. In the foreground, we see a working-class woman selling flowers from a street cart. In the middle ground, we see a bourgeois mother and child riding in their carriage. I'll now present a very brief overview of 5 of the most fashionable types of 19th century women: the mistress, the sexy widow, the woman on horseback, the savvy shopgirl, and of course, the fashionable Parisienne. And I will feature some of the paintings of them by Manet. Elite men during the Second Empire loved to flaunt their wealth by supporting not only their wives, but also their extravagant mistresses. These women occupied what was then called the demi-monde, or half-world, the counterpart to the monde, the world of society where men socialized with their wives. Cocottes soon became celebrities alongside other elite women. They were known for extravagant spending. Conspicuous consumption was central to the cocottes' identity. They wore lavish jewels and the latest dresses from Worth. Worth famously was willing to dress anyone who could afford his high prices. Note the large blue sapphire earrings edged in diamonds that Mary Laurent wears in Manet's painting. The British courtesan Cora Pearl was famously the mistress of Emperor Napoleon III's half-brother, Charles, the Duc de Morny. At the time, courtesans were called cocottes. Cocotte means hen, which may seem like a strange slang term for a mistress, but we actually have the same expression in English, the side chick. Cocottes were extremely chic and knew how to make an impact. You can see that in Pearl's glance, captured by the fashionable photographer 𝖬𝗎. She wears the large pearls that she was famous for, and a daringly skimpy dress with the barest of shoulder straps. Pearl threw lavish parties with only the best food and drink. She was especially known for her skill at riding. Between 1863 and 1868, only 5 years, Pearl bought more than 60 horses. In the space of 3 years, she spent 90,000 francs with one horse dealer alone. The scale of the expenditure was all part of the show. This was when most working women in Paris earned only 2 francs a day or less. 90,000 francs. That's impressive. Cocottes peopled the parks, boulevards, and operas of modern Paris. Here we see women dressed in the 2 latest styles, daringly short skirts and extravagantly long ones. Here you can also see some of the eye-catching new colors made possible by artificial dyes that the savvy Parisienne avoided, but the cocotte often embraced. Note the caricature's emphasis on looking. Men are looking at women, but women are equally appraising the men. Many pretty petite feet are on careful display. Indeed, it became the coquette's hallmark in art to discreetly display her foot and a bit of leg. Remember the flirty sketches we saw earlier of women's feet that Manet sent to Isabelle. Manet painted many cocottes, perhaps most famously here in Nana. The beautiful actress and cocotte Henriette Hauser posed for Manet. She's standing in her underwear a chemise topped with a blue corset, paired with embroidered stockings and lace-edged pantalettes. The somewhat bored gentleman who waits for Nana still has his hat on, a sign that he's quite comfortable in his position, as it was rude to wear a hat indoors in the presence of ladies. Nana is clearly not his wife, but his mistress. Nana is powdering herself. Indeed, powder was acceptable on women of all classes, but Nana is also applying red lipstick, which was not. The courtesan in the caricature on the left shows two men in conversation behind a courtesan, admiring herself in the mirror. The one with his hat off whispers, "But you fool, you spend too much money on her. You'll end up going broke." And the coquette's lover, with his hat firmly on, responds, "What does it matter, since nowadays it's fashionable to be broke?" In the book, I try to discuss the lives of real women as much as possible to show how women responded to these stereotypes and styled themselves with these types in mind. Manet here paints Jeanne Duval, most commonly known as Baudelaire's mistress, for her on and off again relationship with the poet, which lasted more than 20 years. Duval was born in Haiti to a Black mother and white father and was an actress. Manet depicts Duval in a dramatic blue and white striped dress, the extravagant volume of which nearly consumes her. Her inviting gaze, reclined position, and the luxurious dress would have prompted contemporary viewers to see her as a coquette. By contrast, in a contemporary photograph taken by Nadar, Duval presents herself with none of the playful or seductive character often associated with images of coquettes, but instead as an extremely fashionable and rather serious woman. The pose is one of perfect bourgeois respectability, as seen in fashion plates. She's seated with her feet up on a cushion, hands crossed, and a fan is resting in her lap. This Le Mode Illustrate plate demonstrates perfectly how Duval is on trend, wearing a crinoline skirt with a long embroidered fringed belt that was then fashionable. Most current of all is the striking straw bonnet she wears tied with a large bow under the chin, just like that one seen in the fashion plate. If Duval was styling herself to appear like a married woman rather than a mistress, some married women chose to do the opposite, shocking critics with their sexiness, confidence, and obvious makeup, which made them appear more like mistresses than wives. The problem with Madame X, which depicts the American beauty Virginie Gautreau as painted by John Singer Sargent, was not the dress, but how she wore it. You can see similarly bare dresses, including one with jeweled straps in the illustration of the actress Mary Vallier and in the painting by James Tissot. As the engraving reveals, however, originally Sargent painted one of Madame Gautreau's straps as having fallen off her shoulder. One critic quipped, "One more struggle and the lady shall at last be free." Indeed, it was Gautreau's lavender-powdered skin, rouged lips, black brow, fallen strap, removed gloves, and aloof conviction of her own beauty that put off critics. Having a successful portrait exhibited at the Paris Salon could make or break a woman and an artist's reputation. The Comtesse Alice de Lancey was in fact Julia Tull, a rich American divorcee from Baltimore who had affairs with several prominent aristocrats. In France, Tull changed her name to Alice and bestowed the title Comtesse de Lancey on herself. There was no Count de Lancey. Having rich, titled lovers who lavished her with gifts, she's been labeled a coquette by some writers today, but critics at the time were less certain. Every detail of Carolus Duran's sensational portrait was designed to provoke, from de Lancey's seductive stare to her petite feet in shiny gold-heeled shoes. She reclines in a lavish princess-line white silk satin ball gown with plunging décolletage and a long train fanned out beneath her. One critic declared her, quote, "a dazzling model of contemporary elegance. There is a strange and attractive seduction in this pretty woman in a white satin dress, stretched out on a sofa, her left hand supporting the most adorable head in the world, and the other holding, like a weapon, a fan. The sparkling look of defiant provocation is below the surface, while the most coquettishly feminine smile accentuates the irritating and charming expression." The second fashionable type was also known for her beauty and sex appeal, the young widow. While widowhood is less commonly sexualized today, during the Second Empire, widows began to dress more fashionably than ever before. The allure of a beautiful woman in mourning dress as the hallmark of the anonymous city life of Paris was memorably captured in Baudelaire's 1855 sonnet to a passerby. And the young woman was a frequent character in fiction and on the stage. The young widow as a type was made famous in the fables of La Fontaine. He has a whole story titled Le Jeune Veuve, the young widow. His story reassured readers that these alluring women would eventually be looking for new love. Here we see some paintings of those beautiful widows dreaming of new loves. With the rise of elaborate mourning dress customs and their widespread adoption across all classes, grief became a public performance, where women could be judged for their apparent sincerity and the correctness of their costume. Artworks depicting attractive young widows ranged from the melodramatic to the comic. Mourning dress followed the same lines as fashionable dress and thus had to be purchased quickly for each new bereavement. You couldn't just store your mourning clothes away. You had to go buy new ones every time. This actually accelerated the rise of ready-to-wear clothing for women. By 1869, the young widow as a type was so culturally pervasive that Albert Lambron de Peltier created a satirical version for the 1869 Salon, mixing the codes of history painting and of modern life by including a winged adolescent Cupid alongside his ultra-chic widow for comic effect. The caricature at the right shows a woman in a mourning bathing suit. Suffice it to say that no one was supposed to go swimming while in mourning. She's alongside her friend who asks why she's wearing such a mournful swimsuit. The woman, clearly a coquette, replies, "He left me, my dear. Thus I wear mourning so that other men know that I'm in need of consolation." Suitors often sent bouquets along with their letters of consolation. De Young's widow, who wears a posy of red flowers at her neck, seems to listen with interest. Manet's painting of Berthe Morisot in a black mourning hat with a posy of violets would likely have been read in this context. The unknown woman in mourning represented an enigma. Whom was she mourning? Or was she in mourning at all? Women could and did re-wear their fashionable mourning dresses even after their mourning period was over. In anonymous urban life, real women like the Countess de Castiglione could choose to adopt the trappings of mourning or take them off according to their own desires. The third fashionable type I discuss in the book is the Amazon. The independent equestrienne became increasingly prominent in Second Empire and Third Republic Paris. Manet here captures an Amazon alongside a host of other types during the 1867 World's Fair. The aristocratic and royal associations of riding made it an attractive leisure pursuit that was quickly adopted by the status-conscious bourgeoisie, with Empress Eugenie's encouragement. This democratization of riding was made possible by the rise of riding schools and stables offering horse rentals. For those who could not afford that expense, equestrian photography studios emerged that allowed one to at least pose as an Amazon to impress one's friends. Simple riding habits telegraphed good taste, but also invited confusion over class, as some working-class women rode professionally in circuses, as Zelinka Lizvesky did, and some cocottes like Cora Pearl, as we saw, were famous for their riding skills. It's interesting that Lizvesky crossed out the standing photograph. It's very faint, but you can see the X that she drew. She seems to have preferred the more seductive reclining version. The Amazon represented a threat to men's sense of control over women, as she wore a tailored habit made by a male tailor and top hat, and she had the freedom to move independently. Who knew whom she might arrange to meet in the forest? I nearly laughed out loud when I first saw this Van Beers rendezvous in the Bois de Boulogne. This is a big, vast public park outside of Paris. The come-hither stare and the carefully outlined legs, which are suggestively crossed — women weren't meant to be crossing their legs in this era — exaggerate even further the eroticism of the scene. It presumably goes without saying that it was not considered proper for a lady to lounge seductively on the forest floor. When it was exhibited in Paris in 1880, one critic praised her pose as one, quote, full of charm and abandon, and affirmed, quote, "This is indeed the Parisienne, whom all those who have rubbed shoulders with the feminine graces of the great capital will not fail to recognize and appreciate." While At the Seaside certainly appears more circumspect to us today, salon audiences immediately recognized its subject. the actress and cocotte Sophie Croisette, who was Sarah Bernhardt's main rival at the Comédie Française. The life-size portrait, which was 11 feet tall and 10 feet wide, was a sensation at the 1873 Paris Salon. Offstage, Croisette lived in a lavish mansion on the Champs-Élysées, where she hosted a regular salon frequented by prominent aristocrats, politicians, and financiers. Presenting herself as an avid equestrian to the enormous salon public, added fashionable and aristocratic associations to her image and increased her celebrity and allure. She was in a long-term relationship with Jacques Stern, one of the founders of the Banque de Paris and Pays-Bas, which is now the Bank of BNP Paribas. They had a son together in 1877, 4 years after this portrait, and eventually married in 1885. Dressed in a plain black riding habit made by a male tailor and wearing a top hat gave the Amazon a rather masculine appearance. So most painters took care to emphasize their model's femininity, including posies of flowers and diaphanous veils. Key was the possession of a tiny waist, which many painters took care to emphasize and photo retouchers were happy to create. Louise Obama's depiction of the actress Alice Regnault charmed critics by emphasizing the model's beauty and by placing her on the steps of Sarah Bernhardt's Paris mansion. Manet's final unfinished Amazon paintings were often a bit more ambiguous, capturing the contemporary anxieties that the woman on horseback provoked. Unlike the other fashionable types, the Demoiselle de Magasin represented an occupation rather than a lifestyle choice, stage of life, or leisure activity. As a job, it came with a uniform, responsibilities, and an expected code of conduct. In the contemporary hierarchy of shop girls, the department store saleswoman sat at the top, representing the most desirable and aspirational role as they earned commissions on sales, as well as free food and lodging. The elite laundress, seen on the left, was at the bottom, and was also the most flirty, as Jules Satin's painting captures so well. Working in a shop depended on adhering to expectations of the type and to contemporary beauty and body ideals. The department store shop girl is shown at the far left of the song sheet dedicated to all the different types of shop girls. She's right here. A milliner with her characteristic red round hat box appears front and center and lifts her skirt high. By contrast, the department store shop girl, wearing a red hat and blue skirt, carries no parcel and does not raise her skirt. She betrays no sign of her occupation at all to the top-hatted gentlemen who are closely pursuing her. The verse emphasizes her fashionability and the difficulty of identifying her. Quote, "Tell me, who is that beautiful woman with that aristocratic bearing? That beautiful woman is the demoiselle of Printemps and of Bon Marché. Salute her if you please. Let her be celebrated in prose, in verse. She is Parisienne and French and gives chic to the universe." Envied for their fashion knowledge, higher incomes, and evenings off, Demoiselles de Magasin also endured a frenetic work environment, mistreatment by customers, and sexual harassment. The department store helped democratize fashion, but imposed a brutal uniformity on its workers. Artists thus mostly avoided depicting their regimented lives in the store, instead choosing to show them at leisure, as Manet does, and on Sundays, as Georges Seurat does in A Sunday on the Grand Jatte. The money and experience Demoiselle de Magasin gained from working in the store gave them the ability to transform themselves outside of it, where they could pass as a bourgeois woman or simply a Parisienne. But they didn't always succeed. Manet's In the Conservatory was modeled for by his married friends, Jules and Jean Guimet. Madame Guimet worked in a dress shop and was actually French, but several critics at the time thought she looked American. This was not a compliment. Critics called her ungainly and an empty lobster. The matching accessories and the plain, conservative nature of the dress, which resembled the black and white illustrations shown in fashion magazines, not the chic color ones, made her appear American. Helen Burnham notes the tensions Manet suggests through Madame Guimet's expression and pose. Why would Madame Guimet appear relatively ill at ease? What does it take to maintain a fashionable facade? To be chic, but also respectable, flirtatious but ultimately correct, would affirm, in this case, a more stable class and gender position than she likely occupied. As we've seen, the Parisienne encompassed women of all classes, but was also the slowest to develop a clear visual archetype. Carolus Duran's 1869 portrait was a sensation at the Salon for seeming to capture the Parisienne's signature chic and theatricality. By the 1880s, however, paintings of Parisiennes had become a small industry. Differing little from contemporary fashion plates, they captured the chic Parisienne for easy display at home or abroad. Alfred Steven's 1880 La Parisienne is typical of this sort of commercial Parisienne painting. Measuring 3 feet by 2 feet, it depicts a tall, slender Parisienne in a striking green promenade dress designed by Charles Frederick Worth, posing while out walking in a vague park setting. By 1900, at the Paris World's Fair, a 20-foot-tall statue of a Parisienne, said to have been dressed by the leading couturier Jean Paquin, would literally embody the city and Parisian fashion dominance. Crowning the entrance pavilion of the fair, far removed from the everyday, this regal Parisienne appeared to rule Paris and the fair's 50 million visitors, 115 feet in the air. Manet was a master of the type. In 1875, his friend Carolus Duran's portrait of his wife was bought by the French state for immediate display at the Musée de Luxembourg. That same year, Manet painted his own version of the black-clad Parisienne against the same sort of vague background he would later employ in some of his portraits of Isabelle Lemonnier. The Parisienne was a role that was performed and required external validation. It was an ideal of femininity that was used to punish women who failed to please men or to conform to their fantasies. One could fall short for being judged too fat, but also too thin, for being too demure, but also too self-assured. Critics deemed Madame Richard's outfit to be of, quote, bad and doubtful taste, and ruthlessly described her as massive, corpulent, vulgar, and Rubenesque. Renoir's Parisienne was deemed too mousy and demure. Reviews criticized the painting for failing to live up to the Parisienne's trademark allure. Quote, it is almost seductive, but at most a promise. We've already spoken about the scandal of Madame X. Parisienne was a label rarely assigned to real women, but instead used to describe a whole host of idealized women imagined by artists in stereotypical scenes. The actress and courtesan Jeanne de Marcy, who modeled for Manet's 1882 Salon painting, Jeanne was an exception. Her ideal beauty and body, her fashionability and flair, all caused critics to rush to label her a Parisienne. Manet captures Jeanne's pert nose, fair skin, long lashes, and pink lips. Jeanne wears an appropriately high-necked, pale day dress decorated with small blue and yellow flowers. Buttery kid-skin gloves cover her forearms, and a single gold bangle ornaments her wrist. The choice to pair a bonnet with black, bold ribbon ties with a pale, floral silk dress was immediately arresting and very chic. Parisiennes were praised for their individual flair and risk-taking in making such bold juxtapositions. Adhering to a monochromatic look, as the woman in brown in the fashion plate does, required less personal style. One critic later wrote of de Marcy, she rests uncontested, the most beautiful woman in Paris, that is to say, the world. Even the most beautiful woman in the world needed some help. Thanks to 𝖬𝗬𝗠, the conservator at the Getty Museum, for sharing these X-ray and raking light images of Jeanne, which Manet worked to dramatically slim de Marcy's already trim waistline. The blue line on the raking image at right indicates where her abdomen originally appeared, before being masked away by the addition of some very helpful foliage. An 1882 caricature playfully described the ideal silhouette of the Parisienne du jour using an architectural diagram, which emphasizes the extent to which de Marcy embodied the physical ideal of the time. Implicit in the du jour label is an acknowledgement that these ideal proportions frequently change, as indeed they often did. De Marcy's image was later used, likely without her consent, to promote Duke's cigarettes in its series of playing cards featuring French actresses. An American company choosing to associate its brand with women from the French stage underlines the Parisienne's global power in signifying chic and sexual allure and driving sales. De Marcy regularly emphasized her attractive figure to good effect in photographs. The shiny satin bodice draws attention to her slender figure, which was made even more trim with the help of the photo retoucher, who slimmed her waist and smoothed her back to create even more extreme proportions. You can see the sort of telltale haziness here, where at the gray marks where her waist has been photoshopped away. One of my favorite discoveries when writing the book was Jean de Marcy's lingerie bill for 6,000 francs from a single dressmaker in 1889. The 480-franc nightgown provoked the most amazement in the press. At the time, a female fashion worker in Paris earned only 540 francs for the entire year. I hope this whirlwind tour of these types has given you a new context for understanding Manet's interest in fashion and his portraits of Isabelle Lemonnier. He depicts her as a modern and a bit mysterious Parisienne. With no setting or clear narrative, we're left wondering who she is and where she is going, as we so often do when passing people in the streets of modern cities. To conclude, I want to end the talk with a brief coda about a different series of paintings Manet did featuring another fashionable woman like Lemonnier. Indeed, it's how I opened the book. Manet's paintings and watercolors of Lemonnier immediately reminded me of his earlier series Manet did featuring the artist Berthe Morisot, who would shortly thereafter become his sister-in-law, marrying Manet's brother Eugène. In these paintings, Morisot wears fashionable black, but she strikes some rather unusual poses, slouching in one, hiding behind a fan in another, showing off a pink heel in the third. Having now learned about these types, it's hopefully easy to understand the scandal that Manet's full-length portrait of Morisot reclining would have caused, and why he cut it down before gifting it to her. While Morisot largely painted safely bourgeois subjects, she was much more adventurous in her own self-presentation. Indeed, in these private portraits by Manet, she was often a bit mysterious and flirtatious. She playfully shows off the pink low-heeled slippers she was famous for wearing. She's displaying her petite feet like a flirty shopgirl or a sexy cocotte. Her husband, Eugène, playfully wrote to her saying, "I've run all over Paris and didn't so much as catch a glimpse of the little pink shoe with the rosette that I know so well." Both Manet and Morisot were experts in the contemporary codes of dress, behavior, and art, but also seem to have taken pleasure in defying them. In these paintings, Manet and Morisot seem to celebrate the pleasures of ambiguity, of challenging convention, and of playing a part. Morisot and Manet had mastered the art of Parisian chic. But just because they knew the rules didn't mean they had to play them by them. Thank you. I look forward to your questions. So if you can just raise your hands, then they'll bring a mic so that everyone can hear your question.
Can you explain the pattern, the dress pattern that you showed up on the screen?
Yes. We'll get there eventually. There it is. Okay, so these were printed on very thin tissue paper. And the expectation, and they were reduced in size. They would fold out, but they would not be life size. So the expectation was that you would then upsize them, you would scale them up. But they economized, because it was expensive to print these, by putting patterns for like 6 different dresses on the same sheet of paper. And so if you see down the side, there's just instructions telling you which numbers and letters you need to look for in order to identify the correct pattern. So yes, it's a little bit mind-boggling to us today, but it was a real innovation at the time, because up until that point, dresses were never being patterned. They were just being made, custom made for individuals. And so suddenly being able to copy a Worth dress and have a couture dress was really exciting for women. And it may be made out of cheaper fabrics. It wouldn't maybe have all of the finesse that it would coming from the couture house, but you could have exactly the same silhouette.
Thank you so much for your talk. I appreciate it. There we go. I'm just curious, you lay out all of these kind of chic social types. How do you differentiate, or maybe the ambiguity is part of it, the chic Parisienne in black versus the mourner in black? Is it necessary as a person walking down the street to be able to know the difference, or?
Well, yes, because like our caricature of the Ved accosting our woman in the similar coach to Isabelle Lemonnier, you need to know who you can pick up and who you need to tip your hat to, right? You need to know. The types were basically invented so men could know who was available to them. But of course, women knew this, and they could play into the type, or they could play against the type, as I showed. Not all mistresses wanted to dress like mistresses, and a lot of wives wanted to dress like mistresses to get their husband's attention. There were lots of advice in the fashion magazines, like, well, consider dressing a bit more adventurously because if you attract your husband's friends, maybe he'll come back to you. So it was very much something that women, and there's all these complaints in the period, like, you can't tell women apart. You have wives dressing like mistresses, you have mistresses dressing like wives. How are we supposed to know who we can talk to? So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, hi. So my question is a bit long-winded, but I'd like you to expand more on the concept. You kind of talk about it, but not in these terms, of the vulga, sort of knowing what to wear and knowing your station in life. I think it was an exhibition I saw years ago about the vulga and learning to dress. So you talk about, I'd say, the different archetypes of women and knowing how they move through society and what would be too much or too inappropriate to wear and sort of stuff like that. I'm quite curious about that. Thanks.
So you want to know how it was established, or what?
Well, yes, more so if someone was a mistress, she dressed like a housewife. Would that be appropriate, or how would she be able to navigate those blurred lines that no one tells you about, but you have to navigate it when you live in society? Yeah.
Well, I think in real life, it was not as clear-cut as it is in painting, and this is why these paintings were very popular, because you could feel like you got it right, like you could really read the story. I think in real life, it was often ambiguous, right? And so I see these types as sort of compensating for that anxiety that you actually, in real life, can't tell these women apart as much as you would want to. But in painting, you can, because the artists usually are very invested in helping you tell who is who. And how, in terms of how it was set, and this is also, I think, very convenient for the fashion press, because it made women really paranoid, and they felt like they always needed advice. Like there's all these letters into the fashion magazines being like, well, what do I wear? Like, is this okay? Like, is this going to be okay? And all these sort of anxieties about how to present themselves in a proper way. Even in mourning, there's all this, you would think that no one really care what you're wearing when you're in mourning, but there's so much anxiety about being correct during mourning. And it's often the fashion magazines that are helping set what is correct and what is fashionable and what is chic and what is not chic. And so you have to subscribe, right?
All right, so you talked about the wife as dressing like a mistress. Was this a common ideation, or was this less common and just more so in paintings?
No, it was very common in real life. I think it's less common in paintings, although there are examples. Because there was this sort of sense of competing with the mistress for your husband's attention and money. There's lots of actually letters to the editor, despairing that their husbands give their mistresses 50,000 francs a year on clothes, and they're only getting 7,000 francs. Because having a sexy mistress was important. Having a sexy wife was not. And so I think there was this drive to try to, like I said, attract your husband back to you, and maybe he'll start lavishing you with gifts instead. And so it becomes a real social problem.
Well, thank you very much for your talk. I wanted to inquire about the pre-Raphaelites and if there was any sort of influence on Monet. I'm a big fan of their movement, but I know they were more English per se. So there are some famous paintings of mistresses in the pre-Raphaelite movement. So is there any sort of stylistic overlap?
I think the big difference between Manet and the Impressionists and other modern life painters in Paris and the pre-Raphaelites is that the pre-Raphaelites paint women usually in aesthetic dress, in sort of dress reform dress. They're not as interested as Manet is in all of the latest details of fashion, right? They're not, it was a trend in a very small subset of women to like give up the corset and wear these like more flowy gowns, but it certainly wasn't fashionable. And so in Paris, the artists are very concerned about fashion, and I think that's not the priority as much, although, you know, mistresses are everywhere.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, loved your talk, thank you. It seems like almost all of the cocottes that you showed were also actresses. How did those, were they really actresses and were they performing, I don't know, the Comédie Française or wherever? So they were working, how did those two existences coexist?
Well, it was actually pretty essential. I'm just trying to get to my actress cocotte, Sophie Croisette, because they were so poorly paid as actresses that they couldn't afford their costumes, because in the 19th century, women had to pay for their own costumes. And so, and sometimes, you know, going to see the latest fashions on the stage was one of the things that drew people to the theater. And so it became, I mean, some couturiers, when an actress became famous enough, like today, would sort of gift outfits to them so that they could wear them on stage. But until you got there, you still had to buy the clothes, and if you're only making 3,000 francs a year, and that's at the Comédie Française, there's no way you're going to afford a dress that is at least 1,000 francs, right? Like that. So, but the reason why there's so many paintings of actresses who were cocottes is because they actually had a lot of money, right? So there's lots of photographs of cocottes that were not actresses. But in terms of being able to promote an image, this is the era with this rise of the celebrity, right? So we have Sarah Bernhardt, these actresses that become recognizable, and everyone, even though she doesn't look that recognizable to me, like every reviewer knew who this was. So they were also working hand in hand with artists to promote their reputations. So it would advance the reputation of the artist, but it would also advance the reputation of the actress. This giant painting, I actually got to see it in France in a really small provincial museum. Like I said, it's 10 feet tall. This horse is life-size. Then was displayed in the lobby of the Comédie Française. So she was an actress at the Comédie Française. So it was a real promo for her because actresses weren't very respectable, but writing was. And so she's sort of recasting herself as an aristocratic, you know, writer who's very restrained in her fashion, right? Thank you so much. If you have other questions, I'm happy to talk to you informally after, and if you want me to sign a copy of the book, I'd be very happy to as well. Thank you so much for coming.